Okay, welcome to another week of Q&A for 10X Homeschool. We have a pretty good list of questions today with the new school year coming and all, so we'll just jump right in. Um, the first one is okay, if I'm just starting, what are the basic steps? And, and I think what's meant by that is like some of us are starting having never sent our kids to school, but I think a lot of people have to pull their kids out of school. And so what's involved? Do I just go down to school and take my kids out? Do I need to write a letter to the state? And obviously this varies a little bit, but what's the short answer and or some good resources so that people can go figure that out?
So the first resource I'll give you is HSLDA. Actually, let me make sure I've got that right. Also, Nate, I don't know if we want to restart because you're super choppy.
Okay.
Okay, hslda.org. And hslda.org is a community of lawyers that fight legal battles for homeschoolers. And on their website, you can find all the information about your state laws, what your state requires. I live in Utah. My state requires just basically giving a letter saying I'm going to homeschool my child. I've lived in Virginia and California. Their laws were very different. In Virginia, you had to have either a teaching degree, a bachelor's degree, or you could pull out for a religious exemption. So just check your state laws on HSLDA. That's the best place I know of. You can also become a member on HSLDA. I think it's about 100 to 150 a year for membership. And that gives you teacher status at stores like Michael's and Hobby Lobby, where you can get usually 10 to 20% discounts on school supplies. But also, if you become a member and you come up against any legal battle while you're homeschooling, they will defend you. I've had a couple of friends have to use that over the years. I haven't had to use it, but it's a good resource. So with that, it just depends on what state you live in. And you would need to check that out before you pull your child out. Some will require an affidavit, fill out the form. I will tell you, if you go to pull out your child from school, you're going to get looked at weird. They're going to try and tell you you can't sometimes. They're going to try and tell you it's not a good idea. The school loses money when you pull your child out, but usually most states it's legal. So just check on that.
Nice. So I posted that in the chat and I'll post it with the video, hslda.org. It's a good resource. Then you can find out exactly what you need to do. But it sounds like in most cases, there's not too many hoops you have to jump through, and you'll figure it out. It's not as scary as it may seem. And yeah, pretty straightforward stuff. So figure out your state laws, go through that. And then once I can actually start homeschooling, the next question is, what kind of schedule or routine should I be running on? Should I try and match the school year schedule that like most of my kids' friends are on so that they can have summers together? Should I school through the summer so they get ahead? I can remember having grand visions of doing all this extra schoolwork during the summer, but inevitably, summer's the summer. And then we did a lot of reading in the summer, I feel like, still,
Yeah.
but you end up playing with friends and whatnot. But what would you recommend if to someone that's trying to map out their school year?
Yeah, as far as that goes, definitely a personal preference. We've done it all. We've tried to homeschool during the summer. Try, I say, because like Nathan said, the weather just wisps you outside, and your friends do too. And so it is very hard to homeschool in the summer, especially if your children have friends. But something you'll find about homeschooling that I love is that, again, you're pretty much learning all the time. Your summer learning is just going to look a little different. So I do set up a few requirements for my children in the summer, usually reading. Usually some type of math because they tend to forget things a little bit. But we just really try to embrace the seasons. And honestly, most years I don't even start homeschooling again until after Labor Day. I know that a lot of kids, it seems like the school year is getting pushed up more and more into August. I know the kids locally here are starting next week. So we're actually starting next week just because we had a lot of interruptions this year. And their friends will be back in school, not knocking on the door, beckoning them to come outside. So we're going to be doing that. But most years I don't start till after Labor Day because I think if you can soak up the sunshine and continue going on nature walks and enjoying the outdoors, I would do that. So it's a personal preference. But I would say just remember that when you're learning, and maybe we'll get to this in a minute with talking about vacations and stuff, just remember that summer isn't a break from learning. It's a break from maybe what formal learning in school looks like. So they're always learning.
Yeah, and something you had said in a previous conversation too comes to mind about just accepting that not every year is going to look the exact same, and that's okay. Being able, not that you're flying by the seat of your pants all the time, but like this year, hey, we've got less done in the summer than maybe we anticipated, so we're pushing it up a little bit, and it's nice to be able to make those adjustments on the fly and
Yeah.
customize to what your kids need. So, yeah, but that leads us
Right.
to the next question, which is about vacations and or field trips. I know everyone thinks homeschoolers school in their PJs and go on field trip vacations all the time, and there's some truth to that. I've done some school in my PJs, and we've stretched the definition of vacation to include, or the definition of field trip to include some maybe vacation-like things. But what do you do, or what would you say to like the new homeschooler that's maybe a little self-conscious about the looks? Like I can remember, being at the store in the middle of the day, and the cashier's like, "Hey, what are your kids doing out of school? Like, what's going on?" It's not a big thing, but for some people, that interaction is
Right.
super uncomfortable. So, what would you say to that person that maybe needs uh, permission to? It's okay to take a trip during the school year when crowds are down, or go out to the store with your kids in the middle of the day. What would you say? How to handle that?
Well, I will say it is a little normal, especially when you're first starting, to feel a little uncomfortable, like, oh my goodness, I'm doing something wrong. Especially in a state where they are more strict. In my state, it's not as big of a deal. And we have something I like about Utah is that we have we're able to do things as part of the public school if we choose. That was not an option in Virginia. You pay your tax dollars there, but you don't get to do anything with the public school. Here in Utah, you can choose to do some things. So um, just know you're going to get questioned. Your kids will always get questioned. Oh, is it a vacation day today? Is school out today? They will always get that question if you choose to go anywhere. And I don't remember. Do you remember what we did? I think we finally got to the point where he just said, "No, I'm homeschooled," or "We're taking a break today." Or sometimes we would just say, "Yeah, we have a day off today," because we didn't want to deal with it. Um,
Yeah,
but
eventually you just own it.
yeah, you do, because it's just the way it is. It's just what it's part of your life. If you homeschool the right way, it just becomes part of life. And again, you're learning all the time. And so with your vacation question, we went on a vacation with you guys in January, and I was thinking about that today and how we ended up going to Disneyland and SeaWorld.
Yeah,
We went when everybody went back to school, so we didn't have to deal with crowds at SeaWorld specifically. It was amazing. We
yeah,
got to go to everything twice. We got to visit the ocean, and I was thinking about that trip and how even though we were on vacation, maybe with the exception of Disneyland, which I still think there are things you could probably learn from that trip, patience, standing in line, everything doesn't have to be academic. But our SeaWorld and ocean trips, I remember finding some weird creature in the ocean that one day. We couldn't figure out what it was, and pulled out my phone and did some research. And so we saw things that we wouldn't see if we were at home. And so all learning doesn't need to take place at a table, in a book, in a classroom. just look for opportunities and ways that your vacation can be learning. And that doesn't mean you need to turn your vacation into a learning experience, but just be aware while you're out and about the things you can point out to your children, from geography to science to, you know, again, the state lines. Oh, we're crossing from Utah into Arizona now. And you could talk about the borders and the geography and the ecosystems change. And so those are all things you can incorporate. And so don't live your life. Don't let what school has to look like keep you from going on vacations. Take those trips. That's all part of learning.
Yeah.
So,
I love that. Like, it's funny how we get in this mind frame that like there's something magical about the school building. Like you walk to the doors and like now you can learn, right? And like you say, when you're out and about during the day and you're shopping grocery deals at the store, you're reading a book to and from the store. We had our books everywhere we went, right? We're reading on vacation. We're listening to the Chronicles of Narnia on the road trip. That's all learning. And so, if anything,
yeah.
just broaden your definition of what learning is, where it can happen, to include all these other places. And if you feel like you're abusing it, maybe you're overstepping somewhere. But I think that you can go pretty far and push those limits, and your kids can actually benefit from a lot of that. Which,
Yeah. There are travel homeschoolers, actually.
right.
There are homeschoolers that just traveled for homeschool. So you can do it
Yep.
all these days.
Yep. What do you do though? Here's the next question. When it comes to teaching subjects or topics that you don't know about. So, I mean, you gave a little bit of an example there with the it was some kind of sea slug. I can't remember what it was.
I
But
know. I wish I remembered what it was.
but yeah, what do you do specifically? I mean, there's some of those things, but what about if it's like a topic? Like that one mom that's like, I just don't do math and I got to teach math to my kid. So how do I do that? What would you say to that parent?
So while I'm a big advocate for being a great learner. Learn how to learn with your kids. If you don't know it, that's okay. And that should be very telling, in that if you're coming out of 12 years of school and even another 4 years of university, and you feel afraid to teach your child pretty much anything, which is what I'm running into, afraid to teach children to read, afraid to teach them math because they do it differently now. That should tell you something about what the education is doing, and not much. Really, it's just squelching the creativity out of children. There are a few children that succeed and do well in the educational system, but for the most part, if you don't know something, think about anything you've learned since you've come out of the school setting. How have you learned it? You've probably looked it up. You've probably read about it. You've probably gone and started practicing it. You know, anything you're passionate about, you probably didn't learn it in school. I know that you kids growing up all had very different interests, and most of the ones that you pursued in great detail would not have been offered in school. The falconry you talked about before, CrossFit, you know, what's the one you're interested in now? The physiology, exercise physiology,
Yeah.
photography, computer programming. My other son taught himself computer programming. He taught it to himself. So I would just say, be a great learner. Learn with your kids. I almost always have a book in hand and my phone in the other. And anytime come across a word I don't know in a book, we look it up. If I come across, maybe we're reading an older book and I'm not familiar with the practices or terminology from that time period, I look it up. And that teaches you so much. And that's something I don't think that they talk about in school enough. We're just supposed to like teach to a test, but be a great learner and just know that if you don't know it, someone out there does, and you'll find it. And you don't have to be the teacher for every subject either. You can find people that will mentor your child or teach your child in subjects that you're not comfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah, it's okay to outsource some of those things to a trusted source, right?
Yes.
Especially, I think, as they get more advanced. If you have resources that you trust and you know, it can definitely help with more of the technical stuff. Like you don't necessarily want to go learn calculus. That might be a little
Right.
hard for some people, right? But you don't have to, and that's what people need to realize is
Yeah.
you don't have to go become a master in every subject. I think yeah, maybe we're afraid to look like we don't know what we're doing to our kids. I don't know, what it is, but you don't have to have all the answers. The
Yeah.
best thing you can do, like you said, is to model the learning because that's the valuable skill. Yeah, you
Right.
talk about think about anything you're passionate about that you've learned. Well, I would just add to that, think about the things you're passionate about that you've taught, because usually those things that you are passionate about, you probably actually have taught someone some skill
Yes.
along the way. And so you don't lack an ability to teach. You maybe just aren't passionate about something or don't realize that you're capable of teaching something that you've just learned. You can learn something and then teach it back to back. You don't have to have years of experience doing it. Figure it out together and that's all okay. So yeah,
Yeah. And that's actually one of the best ways to solidify your learning is to learn it and then turn around and teach it. So,
that's been
yeah.
proven multiple times. Okay, well, two more questions here, and then we'll end it for today. The first one is what if you could just say one or two things, I don't want to say like regrets, but like that you would recommend not doing or avoiding doing in your first year, and then one or two things like, hey, if you can only do one or two things, make sure you do these two things.
Yeah. That's a good question. Um, and believe me, I have lots of regrets, and I'm hoping that what I get to share is me learning from some of my regrets. I think my number one regret, but it's a little bit of a journey, so I can't blame people for doing it, is trying to copy the school first thing. Just if you can just bypass that, I know some people have to go through the experience and kind of purge that from their system. But if you could just trust, um, just don't copy the school. Don't think, especially with abstract subjects like grammar when your child is in second and third grade, or just even we've got this stigma of thinking again that sciences and maths are at the top of the brainiac list, and just don't embrace all that school looks like. Just do it differently. So that would be one don't. Another don't is don't think that just because you pull them out of school that now everybody's just going to come home and get along and they're going to listen to you right away and want to do everything you say. When you pull a child out of school for the first time, if you're new to homeschooling and your children have always been with you, that's a different experience. But if you're new to it and you've just pulled a child out, however many years they've been in the school system, you're going to need at least that many months of detox time. So just be aware of that. And then as far as the do's, number one, build your relationship with the child. So especially if this is maybe your first time homeschooling at all, or your first time pulling children out, I would highly recommend that your day consist of doing relationship building things together, whether that's games, reading, cooking together, going on a trip because everybody went back to school and you can go to the local zoo and not have it be crowded. Anything that's going to build your relationship, because you're going to have a much better experience, and you're going to probably realize that you don't maybe know your kids as well as you thought you did. But my number one on top of that is probably just always be reading. There's a great book by Sarah Mackenzie called The Read Aloud Family. And I think Alyssa has read this.
Yeah.
And Alyssa your wife could probably testify too that this is a game changer. Reading with your kids every single day. If you think your child doesn't like reading, or you think you can't gather your kids around, it might be tough at first. Just do it over and over. If you need a good book list, she actually has some great books in there. Um, I would highly recommend getting a good book everybody can sit around and listen to. And I would start with that. And then if you want more instruction, come check back here and we can give you some details. But those would be my top.
Awesome. Love that. Yeah. Super important. I hadn't heard, well, I think I've heard you mention it once, but I haven't heard anyone else say that whole detox thing about 1 year to 1 month as far as time in the school system versus time needed to acclimate to homeschool. And I think the main takeaway I get just from all four of those do's and don'ts is please, please, please give it a real try. Like,
Yes,
I think so many people try it once or have heard a bad experience and they just get burned out. And it's like, it does take time. And it breaks my heart when I hear like, oh yeah, we tried it and it was just the worst thing ever. My kids hated it. I hated it. Couldn't wait to get them back. Like, it's heartbreaking because it can be so
it
good.
is.
And I really do believe that if there is such a thing as a one size fits all, like homeschool can benefit every child. You just have to take the time to figure it out for that child. And it does take time and it does take effort, but it is so worth it. And yeah, as long as you do exactly what you're saying and don't model the school system and read out loud and do all those things, like you'll work it out if you give it the time and the patience and the energy and the hard work that it takes. So,
Yeah, I know. I agree. I heard so many people after the pandemic that brought their children, they really brought their children home to school. They weren't really embracing the essence of homeschooling, at least not the way I've chosen to do it. And that makes me so sad because if that's their one interaction with having a homeschool experience, and it really tainted it for a lot of people. There were a few people that came out of it and decided it was great, but that's not the kind of homeschooling I'm talking about. And I agree with Nate. That first year, no matter what, it's just going to be rough. And every year after that, it's going to get a little easier because you're going to start to go, oh, I don't need to do that the way school did it. And oh, this didn't work, but this did. And it's just this, it's really just this journey that it's like you're on a bunch of switchbacks going up a mountain. And every time you come around a switchback, realization, and then you're at the top of the mountain. And then at some point you'll be at the top of the mountain and you'll descend and it'll just flow and it'll work. And it is. It's a very rewarding experience.
definitely. Awesome. Well, that's it for today, guys. If you have follow-up questions or want to hear us go more in depth on any of the things we talked about today, just leave a comment on the video on YouTube, or you can leave a comment in the community as well. So,
Thank you.
yeah, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week.
Okay.
Thanks.
See ya.
Bye.